Hey guys, CJ here with another brand spanking new review of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. And I know we've been like heroin addicts. We've been, waiting to scratch the itch for 3 months. And, while Agent Carter was really good, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. really couldn't be replaced, couldn't be put off any longer. And luckily, it is finally back. So it was going to be really hard for this premiere to really follow the explosive mid-season finale. That's why it was so hard to wait. I mean, the cliffhanger that they left us on, and everything that kind of led us up to, it was pulse pounding in the last couple episodes. The mid-season premiere really acknowledges that it'd be hard to follow and really doesn't make the attempt, and I think that honestly works out for the best, because if they had tried to really up the ante, it wouldn't have worked. But this isn't an upping the ante episode, this is a picking up the pieces episode. Down to S.H.I.E.L.D. literally picking up some temple pieces and unfortunately some trip pieces. And that's not to say this is bad, though, but in the wake of, the literally and figuratively earth-shattering finale, the vibe and tone of S.H.I.E.L.D. is going to be very different going forward for sure, and this episode proves that. So the plot, first let me just say Terrigenesis, yes, and I'll mention that more when I get to the pros and cons. But in the aftermath of the finale, Trip and Whitehall are dead, Skye is in quarantine, and her father and Raina are on the run. S.H.I.E.L.D. is actually in a good position for the first time since Winter Soldier, which is a really interesting dynamic. They're looking to capitalize on Hydra's weakness instead of the other way around. It's open season at Hydra, who is surprisingly multicultural, and we get a Von Strucker reference or two. Essentially, with Whitehall's death, we have a little Hydra employee competition. There's an opening that needs to be filled, so you crush S.H.I.E.L.D., you get a promotion. Essentially, you get Whitehall's job. Now, this is actually, pretty much Bakshi's job. However, Bakshi is still rotting in a S.H.I.E.L.D. cell. And it's really interesting. The Hydra executives expect S.H.I.E.L.D. is going to overextend themselves and are looking to smash S.H.I.E.L.D. as best they can. And positive note, the Mac Fitz bromance is back, but it's on the rocks. I mean, since Mac kind of had that alien in his head thing. It's a nice juxtaposition from the first half of the season as we see Mac now needing Fitz in the way that Fitz needed Mac, and it's great that Fitz seems more or less back to normal. Skye's powers are based on stress, it seems, and it's important to note the team does not know she has earthquake-shaking ability. This comes to the fore during a scene with Fitz where he confronts her, claiming that the data in his head and from the technology that was on her at the time doesn't add up. There's something wrong with her. The data isn't wrong in his head. And that's just, Fitz is a good guy. He would rather believe that there was something wrong with him before something wrong with someone else. But it's yet to be revealed how the team is going to cope with this, because it makes sense that they don't know, and that kind of makes sense. But Fitz ultimately is going to hide her secret, and he hides the DNA scans that would have showed that she did kind of irrevocably change after the accident. So the big mid-twist comes when Coulson and May seemingly die at the hands of Hydra, or Hunter, and it's revealed that instead of being the hunted, they actually have the drop on Hydra. They are the hunters, even though, Hunter was involved. Some clever spycraft involving Hunter and Bakshi, and they begin their trap, involving breaking Bakshi out and returning him to Hydra, but first convincing him that the other heads really wanted him dead. They're the ones, that hired Hunter to get him and kill him. It's ingenious, really. The infighting in Hydra sees the remaining 3 Hydra executives killed by Bakshi's boss's men, and the boss himself taken out too. Bakshi is going to end up visiting General Talbot, where he probably won't see the light of day for some time. So by the end of tonight's edition, Hydra more or less is smashed and S.H.I.E.L.D.'s plan has worked. This seems like it's going to give our team some breathing room for non-Hydra related plots, at least for the next few weeks. There's also an interesting side plot with Cal and Raina on a cargo ship, and more evidence for why Kyle MacLachlan is one of my favorite actors from the show. Raina is absolutely hideous. Zach mentioned that she looked like a porcupine a couple weeks ago, and that definitely holds true. Unfortunately for her, and she's unwilling to live in her current state, so she's actually going to commit suicide. But she's saved by the prologue's teleporting Inhuman Gabriel, and that's going to be something to follow. This episode closes with a touching sort of wake the team holds for Trip, but it's overshadowed by the threat of conspiracy from within, as Bobby and Mac are up to something. They're planning something involving Nick Fury's kind of toolkit for Coulson. Now let's get into some pros and cons. Pros, the references to Von Strucker are really cool. He's someone that we hadn't seen mentioned outside of the movie very much at all, and it's good to see more of a Hydra perspective in this episode. I really hope we get more of that in the future, but after the events of this episode, it really doesn't look like we're going to. I'm also really enjoying how much they're embracing the Inhumans. I mean, they're really just off and running with the idea in Terrigenesis, and especially the prologue for this week's episode. I'd really like to see like a string of these prologues, like what's going on with Gabriel, what's going on with the Inhuman cities in China, and stuff like that. It was great to see Fitz cover for Skye in the end, and it's good to see him better in general. He's been my favorite character for a long time, but at this point, he and Skye are just waiting for the other shoe to drop. So some cons. My biggest con here is that Simmons' change of heart and shift in perspective it's forced. It's really jarring how forced it is. I mean, she's giving us an early example of the kind of prejudice metahumans would realistically face, and it's something that we've gotten to know from the X-Men movies for a long time. But at the same time, it just seems counterproductive. I mean, this is the sweet scientist Simmons that we've come to know over the course of a season and a half, and it just doesn't make sense that she would be talking about the contagion needing to be eliminated, and, maybe it's not the worst thing in the world that Raina would be killed by those troops. It just doesn't make sense, and ultimately it feels shoehorned. This episode has an interesting concept, and while I think it could have been framed differently, like maybe in a standalone episode farther down the line, it was hard to do, it was hard to pull off in the mid-season premiere. I mean, this whole hunter-hunted spycraft stuff really got overshadowed by a lot. So that about wraps it up for me here. Ultimately, this was a solid, comeback episode. Like I said, picking up the pieces, so anything after that climactic mid-season finale was going to be a little disappointing, but I feel like this episode did a pretty good job of explaining where they're at, kind of setting up for the dynamic is going to change. There's more questions than answers for the audience and for S.H.I.E.L.D. right now. So looking ahead, I'm very excited for next week, and the rest of this season in general as the Inhumans plot really takes off. Ultimately, I'd give this episode of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Season 2, Episode 11, Aftershocks, an 8 out of 10. I think it was, like I said, it was a good step in the right direction, but ultimately felt a little anticlimactic. So, that about wraps it up for me here. Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. Signing off, this is CJ, and I'll see you next time.